The Norwegian Sea is not a place that announces itself. It does not have the geopolitical notoriety of the South China Sea or the compressed lethality geometry of the Strait of Hormuz. It is simply a body of cold, deep, gray water stretching from the Norwegian coast to Iceland and from the Arctic Circle down to the latitude where the North Atlantic begins in earnest. Water that is unremarkable in any civilian description, and that occupies a central position in every serious assessment of what a high-end naval conflict in the Northern Theater would actually look like. The Norwegian Sea is the water that the Soviet Navy had to cross to reach the Atlantic during the Cold War. It is the water where NATO's ASW forces spent 4 decades practicing how to stop them. It is the water where the GIUK gap, the Greenland-Iceland-United Kingdom choke point, transforms the broader Arctic into a gated approach to the Atlantic, and where any Russian surface combatant or submarine seeking to operate in the open ocean must make choices about transit geometry that expose it to surveillance, tracking, and, in a conflict scenario, engagement. The Russians know this water. They have been operating in it for 70 years, building the intelligence and tactical picture of its currents and its acoustic environment and its weather patterns with the systematic patience of a navy that understood from the beginning of the Cold War that the Norwegian Sea was not peripheral to its strategic situation, but central to it. The Northern Fleet's operational culture is shaped by this water, by its distances, its darkness in winter, its sea states, and its position in the geometry that connects Russian naval bases on the Kola Peninsula to everything beyond. The Admiral Gorshkov is the most capable surface combatant the Russian Navy has produced since the collapse of the Soviet Union. She is a Project 22,350 frigate, a 2,200-ton vessel modern by Russian standards, equipped with the Poloment Redut air defense system, Kaliber cruise missiles, and, since her 2021 return from modernization, the 3 M22 Zircon hypersonic anti-ship missile. The Zircon is the specific capability that makes the Admiral Gorshkov qualitatively different from any Russian surface combatant that preceded her. A weapon assessed at speeds above Mach 8 in its terminal phase, a seeker that the intelligence community assessed as capable of acquiring and tracking a carrier-sized target at the ranges where engagement decisions are made, and a flight profile that compressed the timeline between launch and impact to a window that challenged the response architecture of even the most capable Aegis-equipped warships. The Zircon did not eliminate the Aegis system's ability to respond, but it reduced the margins to the point where the tactical geometry required perfect execution rather than good execution. Perfect execution under the conditions of the Norwegian Sea in February, in Sea State 4 at night, is a different proposition from perfect execution in a training exercise. The United States Navy knew all of this. The Gorshkov had been tracked since her departure from Severomorsk on the Kola Peninsula 4 days earlier. Her initial track had taken her northwest into the Barents Sea, a common pattern for Northern Fleet exercises. Before she turned southwest and entered the Norwegian Sea on a course that the Carrier Strike Group's intelligence team assessed with high confidence as an intercept track, not an approach for an engagement. The Gorshkov's commanding officer was not sailing toward a firefight, but a deliberate positioning maneuver that would place the Russian frigate in a trailing position relative to the carrier strike group, transiting northeast through the Norwegian Sea, close enough to be a persistent tactical presence, equipped with weapons whose range and speed made proximity an operational statement. The carrier strike group was conducting a scheduled BALTOPS transit, the annual NATO exercise series that moved Allied and American naval forces through the Norwegian Sea and into the Baltic approaches, demonstrating the alliance's ability to project power into the Northern Theater and to operate in close coordination with Norwegian, British, and Danish naval forces. The transit was not a secret. It had been announced. The route was known to every navy that monitored the public exercise schedule, and the Gorshkov's track toward an intercept position was, in its way, a response to the announcement. A visible, deliberate counter-deployment that said, "We see you, we are here, and the ship that is following you carries Zircon." It was a Thursday. The time was 14:11 local. Norwegian Sea in mid-February, the sky overcast at 800 feet, visibility 4 miles in light snow, sea state 3 building toward 4, as the weather system moving from the northwest was filling in. The carrier was at 67 degrees north latitude, approximately 300 miles west of the Norwegian coast, course northeast at 18 knots. Her air wings cycling through the proficiency flights that kept her pilots current in the low visibility conditions that the Norwegian Sea winter imposed. The escort formation, a cruiser ahead, destroyers on the flanks, a Los Angeles-class submarine running submerged in an assigned sector, was in standard open ocean transit disposition. The Gorshkov was at 31 miles, bearing 195, south-southwest, and closing at 14 knots on a course that would stabilize, by the intelligence team's projection, in a trailing position approximately 25 miles astern of the carrier. 25 miles. The Zircon's assessed engagement range was over 500 kilometers. 25 miles was inside the weapon's envelope by a factor that required no calculation. The commanding officer of the lead destroyer was in his combat information center at 14:15, reading the Gorshkov's track. He had been reading it for 20 minutes, since the contact picture had shifted from a potential intercept to a confirmed positioning maneuver. The Gorshkov was not hiding. She was operating with her search radar active, her electronic emissions visible to every ESM suite in the formation, her course and speed consistent with the trailing position she was clearly establishing. She wanted to be tracked. She wanted the American formation to know exactly where she was and what she carried. Silence is a signal, and the Gorshkov's operational transparency was itself a form of signaling, a declaration that her presence was intentional, her position deliberate, and her weapons capability a fact that she was not troubling to conceal. ESM status on the Gorshkov, the commanding officer said. Surface search radar active, sir. MF-90 fire control in standby mode, not active. SIGINT collection suite active. She is tracking us and collecting on our emissions. No Zircon targeting radar emission detected. She is watching, not targeting. Watching, but not targeting. The distinction that mattered. The Gorshkov's commanding officer had positioned his ship, lit up his search radar, and settled into the trailing station that made his presence visible and unmistakable, and had kept his fire control systems in standby, his weapons in their launchers, his engagement architecture available but not activated. It was a professional display of capability without crossing the threshold into operational threat that would require a specific response. At sea, distance is language, and 25 miles of Norwegian Sea between a Russian frigate with hypersonic missiles and an American carrier was a sentence composed with precision. "Log her position, course, and speed," the commanding officer said. "I want a continuous track from her departure from Severomorsk through her current position. The full 4-day track goes into the intelligence package. And I want the ESM data, every emission, every mode, every frequency, from the moment she came into range." At 14:31, the Gorshkov completed her positioning maneuver. She settled at 23 miles astern of the carrier's current position, adjusted her speed to match the strike group's 18-knot pace, and held course northeast. She was in trail. The Norwegian Sea winter weather was between them, snow reducing optical identification to zero. Radar, the primary sensor for both formations. The acoustic environment managed by the Los Angeles-class submarine in her submerged sector. The strike group commanding officer embarked on the carrier, transmitted to the formation at 14:34. "All units, this is the strike group commander. Gorshkov is in trail, 23 miles, matching our speed. She is in passive observe posture, fire control standby. We will treat her as a professional naval force conducting a legal operation in international waters. We will not alter our transit course or speed. We will maintain our own systems in their current readiness state. EMCON condition is lifted for this interaction. I want our own radar systems visible to her. Document everything. Continue the transit. EMCON lifted. Electronic emissions control, the practice of reducing a ship's own radar and communications emissions to avoid detection, deliberately suspended. The strike group's Aegis radars, their fire control systems, their complete electronic order of battle were being made visible to the Gorshkov's collection suites, not as a provocation, as a statement. We are not hiding from you. We know you are there. We know what you carry. And we are continuing our transit. At 14:47, the FA-18F Super Hornets from the carrier's flight deck completed their proficiency flights and recovered aboard. The landing sequence: 11 aircraft recovering in the sea state 4 conditions. The flight deck moving in the Norwegian Sea swell, the LSO calling each approach with the precision that carrier landings in deteriorating weather demanded. Proceeded without incident. While the recovery was in progress, the Gorshkov maintained her trail position and her passive collect posture. Her commanding officer had chosen a moment of operational complexity to be present and visible. The commanding officer of the lead destroyer noted the timing, logged the Gorshkov's behavioral pattern during our recovery evolution, he said to the intelligence officer. She held trail and passive posture throughout. Specifically, note that her fire control systems remained in standby during the window when our defensive systems were partially occupied with the recovery. That behavioral choice is an intelligence datum about her commanding officer's assessment of his orders and his operational boundaries. At 15:22, the strike group's SSN reported a contact, acoustic, bearing from the submarine's position, consistent with a second Russian vessel possibly a Project 971 Akula-class submarine, running deep on a course that placed it ahead of the surface formation. The contact was intermittent, the Norwegian Sea's winter acoustic conditions limiting the Los Angeles-class's tracking confidence. But 2 intermittent contacts were enough to transmit a preliminary assessment to the surface formation. The Gorshkov was not alone. The surface ship with Zircon was trailing. A submarine, if the contact assessment was correct, was ahead. The geometry was a classic sandwich, the tactic the Soviet Navy had practiced throughout the Cold War, and that the Russian Navy had preserved in its institutional memory and its exercise doctrine. A surface threat from the rear, a subsurface threat from ahead. The surface formation caught between 2 engagement geometries simultaneously. The sandwich did not require a weapons employment order to create operational pressure. Its existence as a tactical reality was itself a form of communication, a demonstration that the Northern Fleet had the assets, the positioning, and the professional capability to place an American carrier between 2 complementary threats in the Norwegian Sea on a Thursday afternoon in February. SSN contact assessment to the strike group commander, the commanding officer said, and I want the P-8 diverted from its current track to the sector ahead of the formation. I want to know whether that subsurface contact is what we think it is. The P-8A Poseidon, the maritime patrol aircraft that had been operating in support of the transit from a Norwegian base since the formation had entered the Norwegian Sea, altered its track at 1531. Its acoustic processing systems and its sonobuoy deployment capability turning toward the sector where the Los Angeles class had reported the intermittent contact. The strike group's response to the developing picture was not a change of course, not a speed change, not a shift to a higher alert status that would be visible to the Gorshkov's ESM collectors as a reaction to her presence. The formation maintained course northeast at 18 knots, the carrier's flight deck cycling through its next proficiency event, the escort vessels in their assigned stations, the submarine repositioning to cover the sector of interest. The geometry tightens. In the Norwegian Sea, between a trailing Russian frigate with hypersonic missiles and a potential Russian submarine ahead, an American carrier strike group was continuing its BALTOPS transit and demonstrating by that continuation that the presence of Russian assets in a legal operation in international waters was a factor to be managed professionally, not a reason to alter behavior. At 16:04, the P-8 established a more confident contact on the subsurface target. Project 971, Akula class, assessed with moderate confidence, range approximately 40 nautical miles ahead of the carrier's current position, course, and speed, consistent with running ahead of the formation rather than approaching it. The submarine was not closing on the strike group. It was pacing it, maintaining position ahead of the formation's track, its presence as deliberate as the Gorshkov's. The commanding officer updated his log, sandwich confirmed. Gorshkov astern, Akula ahead, both in passive posture, neither closing, both in legal operation in international waters. He paused. This is a demonstration. They are showing us their capability to position, to coordinate, and to hold a two-platform sandwich geometry against a carrier strike group in the Norwegian Sea in winter conditions. Log it exactly as it is. At 16:19, He transmitted to the formation on the encrypted circuit. All units, update on the tactical picture. We have confirmed surface contact Gorshkov at 21 miles astern, heading northeast, speed 18, passive posture. We have a probable subsurface contact, assessed Akula class, approximately 40 miles ahead, course and speed consistent with maintaining position ahead of our formation. Both contacts are in passive collect posture. No fire control active on either platform. This is a coordinated Russian observation operation. We are continuing our BALTOPS transit without modification. The Russian operation is legal. Our transit is legal. We document everything and we continue. Nothing about this changes our course, our speed, or our mission. The formation continued northeast through the Norwegian Sea snow. At 1744, as the light failed completely, Norwegian Sea winter darkness arriving early, the overcast eliminating any ambient light, the horizon disappearing into a uniform gray-black. The Gorshkov search radar continued its steady sweeps. The carrier's air wing launched its evening surveillance package. The P-8 continued its sector patrol. The Los Angeles class maintained its acoustic watch on the probable Akula ahead. The Gorshkov held her trail position for the next 11 hours. She was still there at 4 o'clock Friday morning, when the strike group's position had advanced 200 miles northeast. She was there at 7:30 when the formation passed through the sector where Norwegian P-3 Orions from Andoya Air Station joined the surveillance picture, their presence adding another layer of Allied monitoring to the tactical environment that surrounded the Russian frigate. She was there at 11:17 when the formation began its transition toward the entry approaches to the Norwegian Sea's eastern sectors, and the geometry of the BALTOPS exercise began shifting toward the Baltic approaches. The Gorshkov altered course at 11:43, turning southwest back toward the Barents Sea, her 14 hours of trail complete. The ESM suite tracked her departure emissions until she passed below the detection threshold at range. The commanding officer composed his final intelligence report. At 12:08, Gorshkov maintained trail for 14 hours and 32 minutes from initial positioning at 14:11 Thursday to course change at 11:43 Friday. During that period, fire control systems in standby throughout. 0 Zircon targeting radar emissions detected. Passive collect posture maintained. Akula contact maintained a head position for 11 hours before losing track in improving acoustic conditions at 03:15. No aggressive maneuvers by either platform. No close approach. No intercept geometry developed at any point. He looked at the intelligence officer. This was a message. The message was, the Northern Fleet can position a Zircon-capable frigate in trail and a nuclear submarine ahead of your carrier strike group in the Norwegian Sea in winter. Hold both positions for the duration of your transit, and you cannot stop them from doing it because they are in international waters conducting a legal operation. He paused. Log that assessment explicitly. The response to the message is equally explicit. We know. We documented it. We continued our mission. And the Gorshkov's 14 hours of trail, with Zircon in the launchers and fire control in standby, is now a permanent record that demonstrates exactly what the Russian Northern Fleet's operational reach looks like and exactly how a professional American carrier strike group responds to it. He set down his coffee. The BALTOPS transit continues on schedule. We will be in the Baltic approaches on Saturday, as planned. What had occurred in the Norwegian Sea across the Thursday and Friday of the transit was not a near miss, not a dangerous maneuver, not a proximity incident requiring diplomatic communication. It was something that required more careful analysis than any of those categories would suggest. A sustained professional demonstration by the Russian Northern Fleet that it possessed the capability to establish and maintain a two-platform observation and potential engagement geometry against an American carrier strike group in its home waters, and the operational discipline to sustain that geometry for 14 hours while keeping every weapon in standby and every interaction within the framework of legal naval operations in international waters. The Gorshkov had not fired. The Akula had not closed. No threshold had been crossed. But the Norwegian Sea between 66 and 68 degrees north latitude had been for 14 hours on a February Thursday the space where the distance between a carrier and a hypersonic missile was 23 miles. And the fire control system that could close that distance was in standby. Modern naval supremacy in the high north is not measured by who occupies the water. It is measured by who understands the water, who has mapped its acoustic environment, who has practiced operating in its winter conditions, who has built the institutional knowledge to sustain a two-platform sandwich geometry against a carrier strike group for 14 hours, and to do so with the professional precision that keeps the operation legal, the escalation controlled, and the message unmistakably clear. The Gorshkov delivered her message. The carrier strike group received it, documented it, and continued its transit. The Norwegian Sea holds both of those facts in its cold, deep water. The record is complete.